stable, but ended up in her own coalition of chaos, a hung parliament. Theresa May's gamble backfires, but for now at least, she's staying on.
The country needs a period of stability, and whatever the results are, the Conservative Party will ensure that we fulfil our duty in ensuring that stability.
Jeremy Corbyn pulls off an astonishing result, mobilising young voters who took his brand of socialism seriously.
So you should be forming the next government.
We're ready to serve the people who have given their trust to us.
Good afternoon from a rarely thrilling Westminster. It's a Tory win that looks like a loss and a Labour loss that looks like a win. What Theresa May thought was a safe bet turned out to be a devastating failure. The majority she was trying to increase has been wiped out as Jeremy Corbyn achieved the result of his life, polling over 40% of the national vote on a big turnout, especially amongst younger voters. He told Mrs May to go, saying Labour is ready to serve. But she's clinging to office, reliant on a deal with Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party. But their leader has already said it will be hard for Theresa May to survive. In Scotland, the former SNP leader, Alex Salmond, was one of 21 losses. Is a second independence referendum now dead? If you live by the sword, you die by it too, said former Lib Dem leader Nick Clegg as he lost his seat. And as voters deserted UKIP by the million, Paul Nuttall resigned. Will their great cause of Brexit now be softened or even stopped? Well, Theresa May's attempt to take advantage of Labour's weakness in the opinion polls has sensationally backfired. But thanks to a deal with the DUP, she will go to Buckingham Palace within this hour to ask permission to form a government. Jeremy Corbyn has insisted she should resign, claiming Labour, despite having fewer MPs elected, is ready to serve. With one result still to go, here's how the parties stand. The Conservatives have 318 seats, Labour hold 261. The SNP have 35 MPs and the Lib Dems 12. Compared to 2015, Mrs May has lost 12 seats, while Mr Corbyn has gained 29. The Scottish Nationalists have been hit hard, losing 21, while the Lib Dems have picked up 4. That leaves the Tories short of the 326 seats needed for a bare majority. But in Northern Ireland, the Democratic Unionists have 10 MPs, the balance needed to prop up Mrs May. Take out the 7 Sinn Féin MPs who will not take up their seats and the Speaker who doesn't vote, and a Conservative DUP deal could have an effective majority of 16. Meanwhile, the future of the whole Brexit process is plunged into uncertainty, as Paul McNamara reports.
Anxious eyes that say anything but her leadership is strong and stable. This was all meant to be a formality. Instead, Theresa May's election gamble has ended in a hung parliament. The unthinkable for Conservatives 6 weeks ago. Now life as a minority government being planned for.
At this time, more than anything else, this country needs a period of stability. And if, as the indications have shown, if this is correct, that the Conservative Party has won the most seats and probably the most votes, then it will be incumbent on us to ensure that we have that period of stability, and that is exactly what we will do.
It was a very different story for Labour, though.
And I do hereby declare that Marcia Chantal de Cordova.
Smiles on the left. There were a lot of those last night. The loser on the right in green is Treasury Minister Jane Ellison. She's joined on Civvy Street by Ben Gummer, the author of the Tory manifesto. Home Secretary Amber Rudd came within a few hundred votes of losing her seat too. By this morning, the exit polls few believed overnight were a reality.
Theresa May was expected to be doing a victory lap behind me this morning, a majority of 50, 60, maybe even 100 seats before marching on Brussels to start those Brexit negotiations. But there is no majority. There is no triumphant speech, and at present, there's no guarantee that she can even form a government.
One way of propping up that government is with the help of Arlene Foster and her Democratic Unionist Party in Northern Ireland. It's understood the Prime Minister will tell the Queen there is a deal in place and a government can be formed.
Are you resigning, Prime Minister?
The question then is, after such a catastrophic result, how long more will Theresa May be in charge for?
I think she's going to have a go at trying to form a government. I think that's going to be quite tough and difficult, but she's best placed probably of all the party leaders to do that. What's increasingly looking likely, though, is can anybody actually govern the country in any sensible way, and is there going to have to be another election?
No question over Nick Clegg's fate, though. The people of Sheffield Hallam decided that for him. The anti-Brexit campaigner and former Deputy Prime Minister's political demise complete.
Is it a mistake just campaigning on Brexit?
There was some good news for the Liberal Democrats, though. A return to Parliament for Vince Cable, and the leader Tim Farron retained his seat by a few hundred votes, although it took a recount to confirm that. By mid-morning, one result day ritual was underway, a resignation.
I am standing down today as the leader of UKIP with immediate effect. This will allow the party to have a new leader in place by the conference in September.
UKIP's vote share slumped and not a single seat in Parliament won. The electorate had to vote for the Conservatives, Theresa May said, or risk a coalition of chaos with Labour in charge. Coalition of chaos, 3 words that might haunt her and the minority government she leads.
Well, he has not won the election, but this has been a night of vindication for Jeremy Corbyn, defying his critics with Labour's best result for almost 20 years. So just weeks after the party's lacklustre local election performance, what's behind this astonishing turnaround in fortunes? Was it young people mobilising in their hundreds of thousands, or a backlash against Brexit and austerity? Here's Diana Magnay.
Jeremy! Oh, Jeremy Corbyn!
Who would have thought it? 8 weeks ago, his approval ratings were apparently so low that Theresa May had banked on a Tory landslide. Today, with a 10-point surge in the polls and the most votes for Labour since 1997, Corbyn looks and sounds like he's the real winner here.
We put forward our policies, strong and hopeful policies, and they've gained an amazing response and traction. I think it's pretty clear who won this election.
Jeremy Bernard Corbyn, Labour Party, 40086.
That's the largest ever vote for a candidate in his constituency. 10,000 more votes than last time for Corbyn in Islington North, 3 million for Labour across the country, gaining seats in Scotland, Wales, London and university towns, hacking away at Tory majorities elsewhere, winning seats like Canterbury in Tory hands for 100 years. An election night moment to remember as he celebrated with his shadow Foreign Minister Emily Thornberry. For a man with the capacity to be this awkward, he still managed to gain the trust of voters who backed his sincerity, rallied to the anti-austerity cause. UKIPers who Theresa May had hoped would go to her Remain constituencies, which swung from blue to red. The big question now, was it the youth behind this Labour surge?
I think people underestimated the general public and what they wanted. They want an honest debate about our policies. They wanted to see what we stood for, and they wanted to engage in that debate. And Jeremy Corbyn, whatever people criticise him for, he's toured around the country engaging tens of thousands of people in that debate, listening to them and talking to them, engaging with them.
But for all the big talk and celebrations, this isn't a Labour win. Just a bolder, braver party anchored in the socialist left, and a leader who gained credibility as the Prime Minister squandered hers.
Well, the Brexit negotiations were meant to begin in just 10 days' time, and already a warning from the European President, Donald Tusk, get on with it or risk emerging with no deal at all. And from the European Commission Chief, Jean-Claude Juncker, we hope there will be no further delay. Cathy is at the European Parliament in Brussels. Cathy.
Yes, of course, Theresa May wanted to secure a big majority to strengthen her negotiating hand with the other 27 EU leaders. But in the end, she's heading towards the kind of chaotic government she accused Jeremy Corbyn of being in danger of presiding over. And the senior EU figures here this morning have been absolutely scathing about what last night's result means for the Brexit negotiations. So Guy Verhofstadt, the EU Parliament's Brexit negotiator, tweeted, "Yet another own goal. After Cameron, now May, will make already complex negotiations even more complicated." Carl Bildt, the ex-Swedish foreign minister, tweeted, "Could be messy for the UK in the years ahead. One mess risks following another." And it is hard to avoid the conclusion that this is anything other than a giant mess. Talks on Brexit were due to start, as you said, on June the 19th. Now, many believe the start of those negotiations will be delayed. But Donald Tusk, the EU Council President, warned in a tweet that although we don't know when Brexit talks start, we know when they must end. Do your best to avoid a no deal as a result of no negotiations. And that's a reminder that Article 50 has been triggered and that we're on a path to leaving the EU by 2019.
And the big question, Cathy, is this going to mean a harder or softer Brexit?
Well, it really depends who you speak to. Many EU diplomats think that last night's result points to a softer Brexit, and that's something that a lot of UK politicians concur with. David Davis, the Brexit Secretary, appeared to hint last night that Theresa May no longer had the mandate for the kind of Brexit she had a vision of, which many saw as a hard Brexit. And intriguingly, the Evening Standard published an editorial along those lines this morning. Of course, that's edited now by George Osborne, former Chancellor. But on the other hand, Theresa May is now a very weak Prime Minister. She's in danger of being at the mercy of hardline Brexiteers who want, at some point, they put pressure on her to leave the EU without a deal. So some of these questions will become clear over the next hours, weeks and months. Some probably won't.
Thanks, Cathy. Well, I'm joined now here in Westminster by the former Conservative chairman, Eric Pickles, and the former London mayor, Ken Livingstone. Eric Pickles, this is a disaster. She can't go on, can she?
I think she can go on. It's not been a very happy night for the Conservative Party, but Labour didn't win. We've got the largest number of seats, and I think she is entitled to try and form a government to deliver Brexit for the British people.
Why is she entitled to anything when she gambled and lost?
Because she's got more seats and winning
elections. It's a pretty technical sort of entitlement. The party is entitled, but not Theresa May.
That's how our system works. Our system works is the more MPs you get, the right you have to try and form a government. And if she has the confidence of those MPs, she'll get through.
Why do you think this didn't work? Why did voters reject this?
Well, I mean, maybe a month from now, 2 months from now, I'll be able to properly answer that. But, last night we took seats in Scotland, we took seats in the industrial heartland, and we lost seats that you wouldn't have thought we would do. I think Mr Corbyn, we underestimate him. I think he delivered the youth vote on the basis of idealism and basic barrel politics.
Can I pause you there for a moment? Because Nicola Sturgeon is just on her feet. Let's just hear what she's saying.
Consider very carefully the best way forward for Scotland, a way forward that is in the interests of all of Scotland. And I will take the opportunity of saying more on that front in the days to come. The SNP will also seek to play our full part in finding the right way forward for all of the UK. The SNP fought this election, warning against the consequences of continued Tory government. The Tories, if given the chance, will hit living standards, widen inequality and force many, many more children into poverty. We will now work with others to do everything we can to prevent that from happening and to bring an end to the austerity that voters, the length and breadth of the UK, are no longer prepared to accept. And we will work with others, if it is at all possible, to keep the Tories out of government. We have always said that we would work in alliance with others to promote progressive policies to build a fairer country. We stand ready to play our part in that alliance. And it is needed now more than ever. The damage the Tories have done to the stability and the reputation of the UK cannot be overstated. In less than a year, they have caused chaos on an industrial scale. They recklessly forced through an EU referendum. They then embarked on a disastrous Brexit strategy. deciding to remove Scotland and the UK from the single market with no idea and no plan for what would come next.
Well, let's leave Nicola Sturgeon there because Eric Pickles is still with me here, and she's saying Theresa May has lost credibility, and it's impossible to argue with that. She gambled, she lost. She said she wanted strong and stable, and she's ended up in her own coalition of chaos.
It's not been a great night for Nicola Sturgeon either, with
hasn't.
Labour and Conservative Liberal Democrat taking seats away. And I think the possibility of another referendum on sovereignty has gone.
And the possibility of another general election has come back, hasn't it? When are we going to be voting again?
Well,
thanks to this mess.
Well,
I mean, that's 2 elections the Conservative Prime Ministers have called for your own self-preservation, and we're going to be looking at a third quite soon, aren't we?
Well, it's a very subjective view. Never mock the electorate. They're entitled to come to a view. They aren't always entitled to agree with the people that call the election. It's our job to make it work.
But isn't the truth that Theresa May continually just said things that weren't true through this campaign? She pretended she hadn't done a U-turn over social care. She misrepresented what Jeremy Corbyn was saying constantly, and she was found out.
I don't think it's been the happiest of campaigns for the Conservative Party, but I've known her a long time. I know her to be somebody will make a great Prime Minister and can deliver Brexit for us.
How will you put through any legislation now if you're reliant on the DUP? You know, you will have...
Well, it's not.
You'll be totally over a barrel with them, actually.
It's,
this is like the worst days of John Major.
I don't think it'd be impossible to deliver, but it's better than handing it over to the Coalition of Chaos, the Progressive Alliance.
Well, you are the Coalition of Chaos, that's the point.
Only within a small area surrounding Channel 4 News.
Well,
in the real world elsewhere.
Eric Pickles, thank you very much.
You.
Let me bring in Ken Livingstone. And I suppose you're feeling vindicated.
Well, I've been saying for 18 months, Jeremy connects with people, they recognise he's a nice guy, and his economic policies. This is the first time for 25 years Labour's gone into election with a genuine Labour programme, building council houses, public sector investment, and it's connected. I mean, it's 43% voted Tory and 40% Labour. If there is another election, we've only got to get a 2% swing, and Jeremy will be in Downing Street.
Isn't the point you lost? That's what Labour supporters don't seem to be getting. You lost the election.
Well,
against a chaotic Conservative Party, a disastrous manifesto, a weak Prime Minister, you lost.
We started 20% behind in the polls after 18 months of Labour MPs undermining Jeremy. Just think what might have happened if in those 18 months, instead of stabbing Jeremy in the back, they've been out there campaigning for his policies. I believe we've seen the Labour Party come back as a real party for ordinary people, and Jeremy now be in an incredibly strong position. He's capable of leading us into the next general election. We don't know. This is the most unstable period in politics since the hung Parliament.
Isn't this surely your high water mark?
No.
I mean, you've got the youth vote out, and you've got young people to come out and support you. But this is as good as it gets.
No, it's not as good as it gets, because up until the start of this election, when the law requires balanced coverage on radio and TV, people, all they heard about Jeremy was the sort of rubbish you get in the Mail and the Telegraph. We will not roll back from this. This is the base on which we build. And I think Jeremy will lead us to victory at the next election.
I mean, the point is, and we can have a look at the pictures from Downing Street, Theresa May, for all your celebrations in the Labour Party, is about to go to Buckingham Palace and form another government that could last 5 years.
And is going to have to try and get a negotiated deal with the EU in 2 years. Impossible. And there's a week.
Why is it impossible? I mean, even Jeremy Corbyn has said the negotiations must carry on.
They must, but they can't be secured in 2 years. We've got to get an extension. And a lot of Tory MPs will vote against that.
Sorry, you're coughing. Why don't you just have a pause for a moment? I'll try and come back to you, because also with me here in Westminster is Lord O'Donnell, Gus O'Donnell, who was the chief civil servant for many years, the Cabinet Secretary. What will be going on in the civil service now as they try to make sense of this?
Well, they'll have done preparations for all possible outcomes. This is a minority government. It's one of the ones that they will have worked through. It's a difficult scenario, no question about that. Coalition is much stronger, more stable, to be honest. It's more formal. The problem with minority governments, this is a deal, and it's an issue-by-issue deal. And the kinds of deals that get done during minority governments tend to be smoke-filled rooms in Parliament over there, rather than Cabinet committee rooms in number 10. So it's more complex and it's more difficult for the civil service.
You've got the cabinet manual.
Indeed.
What would you be looking up?
Well, the point being, this reminds us that the Prime Minister has the right to remain as Prime Minister and that Theresa May is doing what is her duty, which is to try and form a government.
So it's not as outrageous as some of the Labour supporters
Absolutely
feel.
not outrageous. In fact, it's her duty. She is going to go to the Queen, we're assuming, with some kind of deal with the DUP. She'll put that to Parliament, and assuming
she's actually
she gets
leaving
it through,
Downing Street
right
now as we talk. So she's heading over towards the palace, and she will have to go to the Queen and say, well, I've lost the election effectively, but I'm going to try and form a government.
She will say, this is what I'm going to try and do, and I'm going to put a speech for you to make to Parliament, and it's going to have possibly not as much in it as previously thought, because actually she's got to get the legislation down to the bare essentials. In a minority government, you want as few votes as possible in Parliament.
So the manifesto's out the window?
Well, it's got to be slimmed down to the bare essentials. We've got to do Brexit, which requires an enormous amount of legislation. All those things that were nice to have in the manifesto might well disappear.
And so as the car makes its way down, she'll be trying to work out what she can get away with. And probably the most contentious things like the great social care reform, it's not going to happen, is it?
She's got to sort out first, even before that, she's got 10 days to sort out what's her Brexit negotiating position, because it's a different Conservative party. She's now got Scottish Tories, she's got the DUP. They have different views about Brexit from many of her MPs. You know, some of those ultra-hard Brexiteers have the ability to bring her down in any vote. So she's got to try and find a way to get them all on side.
So this will be a government that could be paralysed a lot of the time, unable to really get legislation through.
They've got to, I wouldn't use the word paralysed, I'd say prioritise.
But what it means is there'll be a lot fewer votes, because every vote will be tense, every vote could be one they lose.
We will go back
and lead to a no confidence motion.
When I was there in John Major's day, I remember winning by one vote and people being brought in on stretchers. I mean, that's potentially, the world of the House will come back.
Can that sustain 5 years, that kind of government? I mean, under John Major, it was the fag end of his administration, the last few months.
You'd have to say it will be difficult, but you know, she's got, the thing is, the reason it's difficult, she's got one of the toughest things to do that any Prime Minister's ever had, which is to negotiate Brexit. And that, for the next 2 years, is going to take up all of her time.
What does that mean as well then, given the parliamentary situation? I mean, what will be the calculation now as she tries to work out her negotiating position?
Well, she's got to sort out, so there are key bits of legislation you need to leave the EU. The Great Repeal Bill, she's got to get rid of all of those bits of legislation that refer to the EU. All those regulations and regulators which require the EU, we've got to have something else to do those, or else actually all sorts of things fall apart. That's big, contentious legislation. The Lords will have their say on it, and remember, the Lords is exactly as it was pre-election. In other words, they have a built-in majority against this government, and they will make life, I think, very difficult for a minority government.
Can I just bring our political editor, Gary Gibbon, into this conversation, who's also slipped in alongside me after a long night, no sleep, I'd imagine. So Theresa May is about to go into the palace and meet the Queen, and this, but she must be incredibly depressed. This is not the state of mind you are supposed to be going to the palace in, is it?
Tony Blair writes in his memoirs about how when he went in there, and he thinks probably for quite a lot of prime ministers, you've just fought a general election, you've been up a lot of long nights, and then you've been up one night completely. And he thinks the Queen's first sight of her new prime minister sometimes makes them look a bit sort of manic and ragged. Well, this isn't their first meeting, and she had her first sort of kissing of hands, as it's called. You don't actually kiss hands. A while ago when she first, not that long ago actually, just last summer, when she first came into office. But she will be looking pretty ropey and ragged, I suspect, and feeling it inside, if not looking it. It's an awful, crushing moment. She's had to, I would imagine, and Gus will know about this, that there have been talks between Sir Jeremy Hayward and Sir Christopher Geidt, the Queen's private secretary, to make sure that everything's in place, the right things are said. And one of those things that must be established is, can you form a government? Now, when David Cameron went on this car trip after the 2010 general election, the Lib Dems were still trying to work out whether they were going to come into coalition with him. And David Cameron, in answer to the question, can you form a government, said, well, I don't know, but I'll give it a try.
Well, I think the point he was definitely going to try and form a government, and it was either going to be coalition or minority. So I mean, there was the possibility of other coalitions. So it was complicated in that sense. This time, I think the Queen will be saying precisely what you said: sit down, have a cup of tea, tell me about what your plans are.
Gus O'Donnell, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, in Scotland, it's been a terrible night for the SNP, which has lost more than a third of its seats as voters across the country switched to Tory or Labour. A clear no to the idea of a second referendum on independence for them. In the last few minutes, Nicola Sturgeon has said her party will seek the best way forward after its election losses. Our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, is in Edinburgh. Alex.
Yes, Krishnan, and further to that, she's just come out two interesting new lines. She's not taking any questions on the possibility of a second referendum, which of course a lot of people will want to ask her at that press conference, and also reiterating again, and I think in the sense that should the May DUP experiment, as it were, collapse, the SNP stand ready to form what they call a progressive coalition with the Labour Party. But hey, let's do the news. An extraordinary night for the Tories. Swathes of the borders now blue, swathes of northeastern Scotland blue in a way that the Tories couldn't have imagined. They had dreamed of around a dozen seats. They won 13. They actually thought they'd get about 4 to 6, frankly. And no question, the mantle of the most effective party leader in Scotland very much passed at the moment from Nicola Sturgeon to Ruth Davidson, the Scottish Tory leader. As regards the SNP, yes, a disastrous night, no question about that, and they're certainly not ducking that. But a little bit of perspective, the SNP, it's true, have won resoundingly the election in Scotland with their 35 seats, but that's down, of course, from 56 at the last election in 2015, 54 as they went into this election. Let's have a look at some pictures now. Two huge victories for the Tories. Let's go up to Murray first of all, up there on the Murray Firth, east of Inverness. This was Angus Robertson, absolutely one of the key operators. Some have called him the most effective opposition to the Tories in Westminster as the SNP leader, swept aside there by the young football referee and an MSP, Douglas Ross, in the early hours of this morning. Leave that, and same story with perhaps a more equally familiar face for the SNP. Let's go southeast now, towards Aberdeen. Yes, that man, Alex Salmond, deposed again in similar circumstances. Well, clearly it was a fairly traumatic and I think shockingly so for the SNP when I caught up with their leader, Nicola Sturgeon, at the main county in Glasgow around 4 a.m. this morning.
First Minister, would your assumption be here that essentially Theresa May has done a David Cameron? She's bet the farm on Brexit and she's lost.
Yeah, I mean, Theresa May's facing a disastrous result. She didn't have to call this election. She did it in a peak of arrogance and, thought clearly she could cruise to a landslide victory just by repeating strong and stable over and over and over again. She's miscalculated on a considerable scale, and, she is facing, I think, a position that is really unsustainable.
Now, of course, other parties too. There's definitely a Jezza effect north of the border. The Labour Party going from their 1 seat to 7. They couldn't have dreamed about that. Kezia Dugdale, the leader, said it was a stunning result. She ain't wrong there. And even the Lib Dems, who we thought were facing oblivion, they've gone from 1 to 4. Joe Swinson back, for instance, in Dunbartonshire East. So extraordinary across the board. But the Jezza effect, you have to say, is happening in Scotland as well. But consider this irony. For years, it was the case that millions of Scots, the English Tories, imposed a Conservative government on them that they didn't want. Now, the Scottish Tories, yes, the Scottish Tories of all things, are arguably imposing a Conservative government on millions of English who don't want it. Who would have thought that possible? Krishnan.
Well, where does this leave independence?
Very quiet. As I said at the outset, Nicola Sturgeon, interesting, not even taking questions on that issue. They campaigned all along saying, look, we're parking an independence referendum until after Brexit is concluded. Now, that really puts it effectively at least 2 to 3, if not 4 to 5 years down the line. Now, you look at how politics is changing across these islands in the last few months and years. you're into a completely dispensation whenever that point is arrived at. But it's off the agenda. Of course, the SNP would still argue they have a mandate with their 35 Westminster MPs against the 24 of all the other parties combined, but it's in very, very deep and very, very long grass, and they are not talking about it. And if you like, the way all the other parties campaigned in this election, which was the SNP mean Indy Ref 2, make no mistake, whether that's true or whether that's false, it certainly appears to have gained some purchase at the polls, from those blue Tory seats down there in Dumfries and Galloway right up to the northeast in Alex Salmond's former territory of Gordon, and of course that shocking result in Murray.
Thanks, Alex. After the break, how the city has reacted to the shock election news, and with a Brexit. Theresa May be in the palace, the rest of us are in the dark. Welcome back to this special Channel 4 news after the shock election results last night. Theresa May is currently in Buckingham Palace seeing the Queen, where she will be telling her that she intends to form a minority government that will try and stay in office with the support of the 10 DUP MPs that have been elected in Northern Ireland. Well, it's been a tumultuous night on the markets. The pound slid still further against the dollar and the euro, although the result has sent share prices up. Our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, is here. What's going on?
Well, Chris, cast your mind back to last June and you remember the carnage in the markets post the Brexit decision. We haven't seen the same reaction today. It's been, in fact, relatively calm. Where we have seen some shocks, some surprises, you say, is in the sterling, in the currency markets, down as much as about 2% this morning, but they have since regained. It has come back quite a lot, and that's because we've seen an increased level of uncertainty. What's kept the pound down since last June has been uncertainty around the Brexit negotiations. So if that was uncertainty yesterday and all year, well, it's now even more uncertain, and that's why we've seen sterling come under pressure. Conversely, as you say, the FTSE has fared very well, really, and it's continued the same pattern it's had since last June's Brexit vote, which is that the bigger companies in the FTSE that report their earnings in overseas have done relatively well today off the back of a weak pound, while the smaller companies in the FTSE 250 have continued to come under pressure. So overall a sanguine reaction, but it is early days yet.
Do you think people are thinking this could lead to a softening of the Brexit position?
I think if it does, I think people are thinking, they just don't know. There's so much uncertainty we don't know. Certainly from a market's perspective, if we see a softening and there's some certainty around the customs union, the single market, that will definitely help markets and it will help the currency. But we really don't know. There is still too much unknown out there. One thing, one wider thought worth thinking about, Krish, in the last year or so we've had so much shocking news. We've had the Brexit, we've had today's results, and one trader said to me there's a certain element of the markets getting used to this type of shock. The market's getting somewhat desensitized, if you like, to this type of happening. But really...
But we all are.
But we all are. But really, in the long term, uncertainty is, for markets and for business, very corrosive. We do need some answers.
Siobhan, thank you very much. So let's talk about the Brexit process and where we are. The negotiations are supposed to start in less than 2 weeks. With me now, Gina Miller, who led that high-profile legal campaign to give Parliament a vote on Article 50 and then became involved in a tactical voting campaign around the general election, and also the Conservative MP, former Cabinet Minister Dominic Grieve. Do you think this will lead to a change in what the government is aiming for, a softening of the position on the single market?
It might, but equally it might not. The Prime Minister set out in her Lancaster House speech aspirations which involved maintaining the closest links with the single market, whilst at the same time giving the United Kingdom greater freedom of operation than we could have within the single market. Now, there was always a question mark as to whether that was going to be achievable or not. But like any problem, you have to approach it pragmatically, because you've got to bring this process to a conclusion as soon as possible so that we can get on with what I call the bread and butter issues that beset our country. So,
but she said she couldn't, didn't she? Throughout this election campaign, her position was, I can only deliver Brexit if you give me a big parliamentary majority.
Absolutely.
And she hasn't got it.
She faces a great difficulty, but the Queen's government has to be carried on. There's nobody else and no other party available that can govern. Labour are mired in fantasy economics and they don't have the numbers. So we actually have a responsibility. We have a duty to try to govern in the national interest, and in doing that, of course, any sensible government has to adjust to the realities in which they find themselves. And I hope that the Prime Minister will be able to do that, and she'll have my support in doing it.
Gina Miller, how do you see this potentially playing out?
Well, I disagree that the Prime Minister has a mandate for the Brexit that she was peddling, which was extreme Brexit. It was in the manifesto. She was talking about a deal or no deal. She was talking about leaving the single market, even though there was a special relationship. And I think people have spoken. The turnout was phenomenal. People have spoken against an extreme Brexit.
That is true, isn't it? She doesn't have a mandate for what she was trying to sell.
I think it's right that in seeking a particular mandate for carrying Brexit out in the way that she'd outlined, she hasn't had that clarity. I agree with you entirely about that. But equally, we do have a Brexit referendum last year that delivered a clear expression of desire to leave the EU.
But that could be...
The Prime Minister has to reconcile those things, and we also have to look at it in present realities. And my view is, doing the best we can, if we stick to a common sense, pragmatic approach, we will probably come up with the best solutions. And it's our duty to do that. Because, as I say, the country has got to get on. There was one message I picked up from this election. I mean, I personally thought that Labour's economic policies were dangerous fantasy. But people would like, I think, and I want to pick this up on the doorstep, to be getting on with issues of building wealth in this country and improving public services. And we have, whichever party you belong to try to respond. And the Conservative Party's always believed in those things. So single-issue obsessions need to be avoided. The SNP in Scotland suffers because they're single-issue obsessives.
Would, by your definition, be dangerous fantasists. I mean, you know, that dangerous fantasy got tremendous support in the election yesterday.
Well, if I may say so, the impression I picked up was that people were willing to pursue economic agendas, which in my view are undeliverable and very dangerous to our country. But if that's the case, then those of us who have an alternative perspective to put forward have a particular duty to start articulating and showing leadership in those areas and not being diverted by other issues.
Miller, how should Theresa May work out what her position should be now?
Well, I think by listening to the people who have just voted, but also
the people who voted last year, or the people who voted
No.
yesterday?
There are two different votes. One was to leave. Brexit will happen, but now it's a vote of what sort of Brexit, and it's against the Brexit.
So how do you work that out based on this vote? What do you think people have voted for?
They have voted against an extreme Brexit. They voted against leaving the single market, and they voted against this inflexible approach that Mrs May was pursuing.
How do you work that out, given Labour voted for the Article 50 process based on what Theresa May was offering? You know, both Labour and the Conservatives were essentially offering the same thing, which was a hard Brexit.
Through Best of Britain, we actually asked people, not polled, we did surveys and research, and we asked people a very direct question, both Remain and Leavers: do you want the next government to leave the single market? 50% of those people said no, and only 21% said yes. So the people are out there. If people ask them direct questions, they will give you a direct answer.
This isn't going to be done in 2 years, is it?
I don't know how long it's going to take, but we have as a country some very serious challenges.
But couldn't it all unravel, is what I'm saying? I mean, if we are in this sort of state of paralysis as to what people really want, we are going to end up asking the European Union for more time, dragging this out. We could see another general election. The whole thing could be off.
You may be right, but there are a whole series of hypotheticals in that. It's one of the reasons why we do actually need a parliament. Parliament, for all its faults, does actually help crystallise some of these issues, whereas we haven't had a parliament for 6.5 or 7 weeks. We need to get started. And this is why I'm supportive of the fact that we've got to carry on government and we've got to get Parliament involved in this process. And as I say, ultimately, I love this country and I'm a great optimist that we tend to come up with the right solutions. But you only do that through a process of reasoned and rational debate.
Can you just stay there for a second? Because Tim Farron, the Liberal Democrat leader, has just been talking about Theresa May. Here's what he said about her resigning.
Theresa May called this election expecting it to be a coronation. She took each and every one of us for granted in the most cynical way possible. Theresa May promised strong and stable leadership. She has brought weakness and uncertainty. If she has an ounce of self-respect, she will resign. The negotiations should be put on hold until the government has reassessed its priorities and set them out to the British public.
Well, Dominic Grieve, he said if she's got an ounce of self-respect, she should resign.
I disagree with that. Somebody has got to carry on the Queen's government. And I can't see the national interest in a new Prime Minister coming on the scene at the present time at all. Now, I don't know how the next few months are going to unfold, but for the moment, it seems to me there are very powerful arguments for trying to maintain a semblance of controlled government, and the Prime Minister is very important in delivering that.
What would you like to see?
I think the people have voted against Mrs May resoundingly, but however, to resign now would cause chaos. And I think Dominic's absolutely right about being pragmatic, but in the shorter to long term, I can't see how she can remain.
Well, Gina Miller and Dominic Grieve, thank you both very much indeed. So Theresa May is still in the palace, but is expected to leave any moment. They've put out the lectern in Downing Street that she will come back and talk at as soon as she drives back, making the short drive from the palace to number 10, and the car is waiting to bring her out. We're going to go to a short break now, but we will be back very soon with what Theresa May has to say. Join us then. Welcome back to Westminster, and there is Theresa May leaving Buckingham Palace and heading back to Downing Street just a few moments ago. She's on her way, and as soon as she gets into Downing Street, we expect her to speak and address the nation. There she is. It's a very short journey, just through Admiralty Arch, having got to the end of the Mall and onto Trafalgar Square. and then she will be back to her home. But for how long? That's the question. And what is the deal she has done? The Conservative Party ended last night with 318 seats. Now, that is short of the 326 required to form a majority in the House of Commons. It was a gamble she thought was a safe bet that completely backfired in spectacular style, and there is much discussion within Mrs May's party about whether she can survive, whether she needs to be replaced, and when that needs to happen. And what this deal will be with the Democratic Unionists, who have 10 MPs. This is reminiscent of the end of the John Major government just before the period of Conservative rule gave way to Tony Blair and New Labour. But the last time Britain was in this situation, it was just a matter of months. This is the beginning of what should be a 5-year term of government. It is almost inconceivable, as the former Cabinet Secretary Gus O'Donnell was just saying a few minutes ago, that this kind of arrangement can survive. And here is the prime ministerial car turning into Downing Street now. What must be going through Theresa May's head as she miscalculated so badly, coming back in both a winner and a colossal loser. We expect her now to get out of that car, walk up to the podium and address the nation. Tremendous security presence, it has to be said, here in Westminster and on the entrance to Downing Street, as you would expect, given the 3 terror attacks that we've had in 3 months. And there she is with Philip May, and he will stand by in supportive fashion as she approaches the dais. Very reminiscent of Samantha Cameron watching David Cameron just 18 months ago.
I have just been to see Her Majesty the Queen, and I will now form a government that can provide certainty and lead Britain forward at this critical time for our country. This government will guide the country through the crucial Brexit talks that begin in just 10 days and deliver on the will of the British people by taking the United Kingdom out of the European Union. It will work to keep our nation safe and secure by delivering the change that I set out following the appalling attacks in Manchester and London, cracking down on the ideology of Islamist extremism and all those who support it, and giving the police and the authorities the powers they need to keep our country safe. The government I lead will put fairness and opportunity at the heart of everything we do, so that we will fulfil the promise of Brexit together and, over the next 5 years, build a country in which no one and no community is left behind. A country in which prosperity and opportunity are shared right across this United Kingdom. What the country needs more than ever is certainty. And having secured the largest number of votes and the greatest number of seats in the general election, it is clear that only the Conservative and Unionist Party has the legitimacy and ability to provide that certainty by commanding a majority in the House of Commons. As we do, we will continue to work with our friends and allies in the Democratic Unionist Party in particular. Our 2 parties have enjoyed a strong relationship over many years, and this gives me the confidence to believe that we will be able to work together in the interests of the whole United Kingdom. This will allow us to come together as a country and channel our energies towards a successful Brexit deal that works for everyone in this country, securing a new partnership with the EU which guarantees our long-term prosperity. That's what people voted for last June. That's what we will deliver. Now let's get to work.
And so Theresa May ends a really remarkable statement, speaking as if she had actually won a majority, saying that she will carry on delivering Brexit, and that will be the aim of her government. She almost slipped into that same routine she did when she first entered Downing Street, about trying to govern for the whole nation and reach those people who are struggling. We got no details of what deal she has done with the Democratic Unionists, just that she intends to carry on as a minority government and to pursue Brexit and to complete these negotiations. Well, let's just try and take stock now of how we got here, because one of the key new features of what seems to have happened yesterday was an extraordinary change in the turnout amongst young voters. Now, in the 1960s, turnout amongst all the generations was around 80%. Over the last few decades, it had fallen amongst young voters, 18 to 25, to around 40%. But last night, it seems to have gone up quite dramatically. And with me here in Westminster are a range of young voters who we'll be speaking to in a moment. But first, we had our cruise out last night in an East London pub as the results came in.
Other people who are not Labour members, who have maybe not voted Labour before, but are doing it because of Corbyn. It's not, despite of him that this is happening. It's because of Corbyn. It's because of his left-wing message.
I think a lot of young people maybe have felt betrayed with the referendum result. There was a real sense of a generational divide, and you could just feel something change in the air in the last couple of weeks.
Underestimate social movements. They always underestimate activism. And in fact, all of the major changes, all of the major legislation that we fought for has been down to people, and people on the streets, people changing things. So that's why they're surprised. But we're not surprised.
Tories out! Labour in! Tories out! Labour in!
He has proved every single one of the members of the PLP that rebelled against him decisively wrong, particularly on the basis that he's got a bigger voter share than Ed Miliband, he's got a bigger voter share than Gordon Brown, he's got a bigger voter share than Tony Blair in 2005. This is the return of the Labour Party, and it's happened under a left-wing leader like Corbyn, and they need to get to grips with that.
Yes, we can! Yes, we can! Yes, we can! Yes, we can!
Well, with me now are a number of young voters. Darren Grimes from the Pro-Brexit Believe organisation, and Barbara and Toomey from the Momentum group, behind Jeremy Corbyn, of course. Michael Segalov is also with me, who's a Labour supporter, and also Fatima Ibrahim from Avaz, who have been mounting a sort of a tactical voting campaign during this election to get the Conservatives out. Barbara and Toomey, as you see Theresa May walk back into number 10, does it sink into you that you did actually lose?
I think that it confirms that Labour has done really, really well, with Jeremy being at the lead of the party for less than 2 years. I think if the general election was called even later, maybe Labour could be in a position to where it won a majority. But I think we're talking about a politics system at the moment where nobody seems to, issues keep changing, people keep moving, so the system has to adapt and change with that. And I think that this coalition that Theresa May is forming is more austerity, driving down living standards, a hard Brexit that's going to affect the majority of the people in this country. And I think that people are going to be out on the streets against that, because that's just not going to work.
Michael Segalov, you're also a Labour supporter. I mean, what do you think has actually happened here? Because the Conservatives have done incredibly well. They've polled incredibly high at 44%. So it's not that Jeremy Corbyn, it seems, has changed anyone's minds. It's that he got all of you to go out and vote.
I mean, in part, I'd say firstly, UKIP voters returning to the Conservative Party isn't necessarily increasing their kind of voter base. And what I would say we've seen, it isn't just young people coming out to vote. And that's what this is the start of a process of. It was young people going out and organising, campaigning, 100,000 people using this app that Momentum created saying find my nearest marginal. Nearly, I think, a quarter of Facebook users in the UK watched Momentum's films this month, and 10,000 people from the kind of young Momentum members out campaigning yesterday alone. And these things are starting a process, like Barbara says. It's not necessarily today or tomorrow that Labour has a majority, but over time, that's what hopefully we're going to see.
Darren Grimes, why was your party, the Conservatives, just unable to mobilise young support. It was sort of 70-30, it's thought.
The Labour Party are selling young people a pub. They are telling young people that they can wipe their tuition fee debt, that they'll get free things, lots of goodies.
It's a bit late for that argument, though, now, isn't it?
That all
the
has
point
to be
is,
paid for by...
Are you saying all these young people have just got it wrong, they're just misguided?
Absolutely not. I'm saying that the Labour Party and Jeremy Corbyn are lying to young people and telling them that they can borrow till their heart's content. And that's simply not true. That has to be paid for through higher taxation, less jobs for young people, and a weaker economy. And that is simply not on. And we, as Conservatives, have to be making that case and putting forward those arguments.
That's completely not true. I mean, evidence shows that when you invest in higher education, as in you let young people go to education for free, you create more jobs, you create money into the economy. So we're not selling people
let's
a dream.
not rerun the election campaign.
It's
over.
progressive.
What I want to try and understand is why you think, what was different about Jeremy Corbyn that suddenly got young people out to vote and got young people to divide about 70-30 in favour of Labour? Because a lot of older voters, middle-aged voters and older voters, look at this old man from the 70s and 80s and think, what on earth do young voters see in him?
I think he gives young people hope. I think the manifesto for the many, not the few, the Labour Party put out was actually about young people's future. And I think for the first time, we felt that we had a stake in it and we had to come out and put our views forward about the kind of future and the kind of country that we want moving forward. And that includes tuition fees, that includes, living standards and jobs, and how Brexit is going to affect our ability to be able to move through Europe, be able to prosper. And I think that that's why young people came out en masse. And, politics is completely changed. Young people are getting involved, and I think that that's what, this is really about.
Fatima, your organisation was trying to tell people who they should vote for tactically if they wanted to get rid of Theresa May. Why do you think that? That always happens, but this time it seems to have happened in quite a big way.
I think this is a new dawn for British politics. More than ever, we saw people talking about progressive politics, progressive values, and a lot of people voted, saw this as a referendum again on Brexit. A year on, young people have been organising, and it came out in huge numbers to vote against the prospect of a hard Brexit. This shows us that, Theresa May's vision on hard Brexit is dead and buried, and we need to hit pause on that.
But she's back in office. As you see her go back into Downing Street, do you feel you've been cheated in some way?
By her own metrics, she has lost confidence. With the British public, she has failed. So what she has to do right now is hit pause, work across the aisle and really look at how we want to deal with Brexit. But hard Brexit is dead in the water as far as I see it.
Do you not feel, Michael, that with a better candidate, Yvette Cooper or whoever it might have been, Labour would be in power now?
There's just literally no evidence to suggest that's the case. What we've seen is a movement galvanised around the leadership who are talking about, as Barbara says, issues that matter to young people.
You can't have evidence for that because it's just a hypothesis.
No, of course.
But what I'm saying is this was a historically bad Conservative campaign. A massive U-turn over their central manifesto pledge. They were all over the place for the last couple of weeks. You should have won.
I'm not trying to accept that's the case. I think Theresa May set out what her agenda was in this election, and she tweeted just 2 weeks ago that if she was to lose any more than 6 seats, then she would have lost the election. That was the terms this debate was fought on, this election was fought on. And on her terms, let alone the Labour's kind of terms, that's been a victory.
And do you think the enthusiasm will stay? how long are you prepared to carry on trying to do the one last heave?
What I would say is that this is a process. If we spent the last 2 years, rather than having internal debates within the Labour Party, infighting, sniping and coups, talking about the policies that finally in the last few weeks we were speaking about, I have no doubt the outcome of this election would be different. And that's what I would focus on, not the leadership, but actually speaking about issues in the build-up to today.
I think it's a snap general election as well. I think if Labour had time and the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn, I think, if we had a general election later in even 2020,
Darren, you might say
we'd have a Labour majority.
No, the fact that they have to have this conversation shows that the Labour Party is not fit for office. And Brexit, I'm sorry, I disagree vehemently that hard Brexit has been, or so-called hard Brexit has been rejected. There is only Brexit, and I'm afraid that 44% of the vote is not a rejection.
Thank you all very much indeed for joining us. It's all just starting. That's it from this special extended Channel 4 News. We'll be back at 7 tonight. Until then, from all of us here at Westminster, have a good afternoon.
Live the good light in any weather. Transitions Adaptive Lenses and Boots Opticians sponsors Channel 4 Weather.
This afternoon, any heavy showers across eastern parts of the UK will tend to fade away. To leave most places dry, there'll be a mixture of clouds and sunshine. A blustery wind, but nice enough in the sunshine, with a top temperature of 20 Celsius. Now, through this evening and overnight, it starts off dry, but all change as the next area of low pressure arrives. That'll bring a freshening wind, some spells of rain, heavy at times for northern and western parts of the UK. Mild, though, temperatures generally in double figures. Then for Saturday, it's a wet day for southern Scotland, northern England, Wales and southwestern parts of England, bright skies elsewhere, and in the best of the sunshine, there'll be a top temperature of around 24 degrees.